Welcome to Cairo Nights. I'm Jack Stein. Frank Shire's in the newsroom. Shane Peterson on the ones and twos. I would like to congratulate all the fine listeners of Cairo because you will be getting your $1,400 check, at least if you make less than $75,000. The COVID-19 relief bill with $1,400 stimulus checks passed the House today, and it heads to President Biden to be signed into law. Every article that I can find is also deeply excited, so excited that they constantly list USA Today, $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill with $1,400 stimulus checks passes the House. Boston 25 News, stimulus update, House passes COVID-19 relief bill, paving the way for $1,400 checks. Everywhere you go, everyone keeps talking about the $1,400 checks. What they're not telling you is everything else that is involved in this bill. Here's another one, NBC News, Congress passes $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill with $1,400 checks in major win for Biden. But the problem is that you are being distracted. This $1,400 is hush money from everything that is in this bill. All of the things that we simply do not need. And when you hear people talk about, well, this bill is just filled with pork, don't dismiss them as just being, oh, well, that's just a GOP person who doesn't want poor people to get money. That's simply not the case. This is a horrible, horrible bill. And for your troubles, you will be getting a $1,400 check. I personally think that every American deserves much more than $1,400. If you have had your business disrupted, if you have had your life turned upside down, if you lost your job, if your kids are out of school, I think that you deserve much more money than $1,400. It is a joke. It's a joke compared to the rest of the money that is going out, that is going to be spent, not even for COVID-19 relief. I have a list. I've distilled the entire bill, which again is well over 700 pages. We are going to go through some of the highlights of this bill, which anybody could look at and say, that's absolutely absurd. Why is COVID-19 relief bill going to things that we don't need and potentially won't even be spent for another 2 years? Anybody out there would look at this bill and say that what is actually going on here? What's actually going on is that currently the Democrats are taking taxpayer dollars and they are putting it into the pockets of their friends, whether they're at the state level or at the corporate level. This is crony capitalism at its absolute worst. This is insider politics at its absolute worst. This is total corruption, and they're doing it under the guise of helping people who are desperate for help, who are in desperate need of help. And yet what we see is people covering for the Democrats, and they're saying, oh, well, this is great and this is sweeping reform. And they're giving you all of the best parts of the bill, but they're not showing you all of the worst parts of this bill. In fact, by some estimates, this bill is 3 to 4 times larger than what we actually need. I want people to get checks for $5,000 or $7,500. I want people to be able to pay their mortgage. Don't think of me as this cold-hearted individual. Don't think of me as this cold-hearted individual who's saying that nobody should get anything whatsoever. I don't think that we're at this point anymore in American politics where that's the case, particularly when it comes to COVID-19 and how it's decimated people. But before we get into the finer beats of the bill, here is Joe Biden coming out after the passage of the historic bill. Again, this will be going to his desk on Friday to be signed into law, so everyone will get that sweet, sweet $1,400 check. Here's what Joe Biden said today.
That's why the American Rescue Plan was so critical. I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and the House of Representatives today for passing the bill, and I will be signing into law shortly. This bill represents a historic victory for the American people. I look forward to signing it later this week. Everything in the American Rescue Plan addresses a real need, including investments to fund our entire vaccination effort, more vaccines, more vaccinators, and more vaccination sites.
In the first 45 seconds, Joe Biden has lied to you. He says everything in this COVID-19 package is something that we need. That is an absolute lie, as we will get into. This is an absolute lie. You are being lied to by the President of the United States. It's really quite disappointing If he had come out and said, hey, part of this bill, he can't, but if Joe Biden came out and said, hey, part of this bill is me giving a bunch of money to a bunch of industries that supported me in my presidency, and I'm cutting them a bunch of favors, I would give him a little bit more credit. But $1.5 billion going to Amtrak, what does that have to do with COVID-19 relief? What does that have to do with getting the schools opened back up? What does that have to do with getting people treated for COVID-19? What does that have to do with anything? What it sounds like to me is a bailout for a dying industry. Why are we bailing out trains? Why are we bailing out Amtrak? Unless this is the direction that Joe Biden wants us to go in. Is Joe Biden leading us down this path where he wants us to become more like Europe, where everyone takes the train and everyone goes to work riding the train? What he's doing, again, is he's bailing out the industry by cutting them a check for $1.5 billion. I didn't like it when Trump did this 3 years ago. I didn't like it when Obama did this 8 years ago. When industries begin to fail, they should be allowed to fail. There is no such thing as too big to fail. So I ask you, let's just say you are a left-leaning or a liberal individual. Would you rather have that $1.5 billion that is currently going to Amtrak? Would you rather have it go there, or would you rather have it go to people? I am of the mind that if you cut up that $1.5 billion among your fellow citizens, they could do much more with it than a dying industry known as Amtrak. Here's Joe Biden again talking about the passage of the historic COVID-19 relief bill.
Millions more Americans will get tested, including home testing. Schools will soon have the funding and resources to reopen safely, a national imperative. The American Rescue Plan, the partnership between Johnson & Johnson and Merck, proves we can do big things, important things in this country. Let me conclude with this. Tomorrow night, I'm going in prime time to address the American people and talk about what we've been through as a nation this past year. But more importantly, I'm going to talk about what comes next. I'm going to launch the next phase of the COVID response and explain what we will do as a government and what we will ask of the American people.
Why do I feel like this is going to be bad news? Why do I feel like this is like some kind of evil villain who's, what I'm going to do next to you, James Bond, then I'll take over the world. This is what that sounds like to me. Don't get me wrong. I think that if the federal government wanted to put more money into vaccines, if the federal government wants to put more money into testing or home tests, fine. But what about the people who are actually suffering? At this point with COVID-19, we're treating it very much so like it's some kind of folkloric entity out there, this scary, awful thing that we're still so confused by, when in reality, the miracle of the United States is that we have figured out COVID-19 and we have figured out treatments and we got the vaccine in under a year, and people should be getting back on with their lives. People should just return to their normal, average, everyday lives. But instead, the Democrats are currently trying to extend this for as long as humanly possible. And people just say, oh, that's fine. Totally fine. I have no issue with that whatsoever. This is something that people need to wake up to. This is exactly how government corruption works. This is exactly the way that the Republicans did it, 3 years ago? Or, no, pardon me, last year when they had a bill that was filled with pork, and now you have the Democrats doing it. This isn't just one-side party politics. This is a bunch of insiders at the highest level of government now taking advantage of you, and again, taking taxpayer dollars, which we don't have, by the way, and putting it into the pockets of their business buddies. Crony capitalism at its absolute worst. So Kevin McCarthy came out with a list of everything that was in the bill that he objected to. He also gave kind of you could say it was a last stand against the COVID-19 relief package. Here's Kevin McCarthy earlier today talking about the passage of the COVID-19 relief package, also known as the American Rescue Plan.
From H.R. 1 to voting to defund the police, House Democrats have abandoned any pretense of unity. They passed 3 major bills in 1 month with zero bipartisan support. Today, they plan to pass another. Like the others, it represents a missed opportunity for Congress to focus on the real needs of the American people. At $1.9 trillion in new spending, the so-called American Rescue Plan is the most expensive single bill in American history. Let's put that number in context, Mr. Speaker. If you put it in today's numbers, World War II cost our government $4.8 trillion. But if we pass this bill, our country's total COVID relief spending will now total $5.5 trillion.
Also, keep in mind that there is still $1 trillion from the last package that has yet to be spent. So this is just throwing bad money after bad and then waving $1,400 checks in front of your face and hoping that you don't notice all of the pork and all of the garbage that is in this bill. I say this as someone who believes that you should be getting much more than $1,400. I say this as someone who believes wholeheartedly that this is just a complete distraction and that the people in power currently think that you are stupid and they think that you don't have the time to look at what is actually in the bill. And when we do actually take time to look at it, just ask yourself this question. Let's say right now you're saying to yourself, Jack Stein, this is awful. This is terrible. I'm tired of your cynical crybaby attitude. I can't believe that they would let you on Cairo. Just listen to what exactly is in this bill. And you tell me if you think that this is necessary. A $21,000 bonus for federal employees to stay home. A $25,000 bonus for state government workers if they qualify for it. $50 million goes to Planned Parenthood. $200 million goes to the museum and library services. $270 million goes to the Endowment for Arts and Humanities. $600 million just for the city of San Francisco. Now, what will they be doing with that money, you may ask? Well, you know what? It's up to them. If they want to put a brand new fountain in to celebrate Nancy Pelosi's new Botox, they can go ahead and do that. They can do whatever they want to do with that money. It's just awarded to them. If they want to dump it into bad pension plans, if they want to dump it into bad union plans, if they want to dump it into bad infrastructure plans, they can do that. There is no accountability whatsoever. $1.5 billion for Amtrak. Again, we went over this previously. Do you think that Amtrak is worth $1.5 billion? I certainly don't. I would much rather, again, for as far right as I am, as conservative leaning or libertarian leaning as I am, if the government is going to steal from me, I would much rather have them put that money into, I don't know, schools, children, maybe give children health care. I don't know, do something like that. But when you dump it into Amtrak, I find it to be deeply upsetting. The last time I was on a train, I was 10 or 11 years old, and it was a miserable experience. I will never set foot on one again. We don't live in 1920. There's no reason for anybody to take a train anywhere. $12 billion in foreign aid. Ask yourself, what does that have to do with COVID-19 relief, and what does that have to do with rescuing the American people? What does that have to do with any part of this? $12 billion in foreign aid. I believe every cent of this should be going to the American people. You are being robbed right in front of your eyes. $15 billion for illegal immigrant eligible health care, $111 billion for welfare without work requirements, and $350 billion allocated directly to blue states. That is the breakdown of all the worst parts of this bill. And yet still $1,400. You're going to get your $1,400 and you will be happy to get it. Additionally, in the bill is a $60 billion surprise. This is from Politico in tax hikes. You didn't know they could do that? Oh, they most certainly can. These are going to be applied to... Let me get this exactly. It says the real test for Democrats who promised stiff tax increases on the rich during last year's campaign will come later when they face demands to pay for something big like Biden's plans for a major infrastructure package. This will cost trillions, and lawmakers would need far bigger tax increases to defray its cost. Many moderates are less enthusiastic about tax increases, though, and it remains to be seen if lawmakers won't take the more politically expedient path of deficit financing for their plan. So what does all this mean exactly? They included tax hikes in the bill. There is going to be an increase on taxes in the bill. Now, of course, this is for this new phrase that we hear being thrown around. They say this is for the ultra millionaires. We keep hearing this phrase over and over again. The ultra millionaires out there. This is going to fund nothing. So they include the tax hikes to try to tell people, well, if you're upset about the money that you're going to have to pay on this, don't worry, it's going to be on those people. I'm almost positive that if you consider yourself to be an ultra millionaire, you have a good enough accountant to figure your way around it. I mean, I've got an accountant. I've got a guy who does my taxes. I pay him about $175 a year to do my taxes. I'm pretty sure if I was worth $100 million, there would be somebody out there who could figure out how I could save my money and keep it from the federal government. So yeah, that is what you get. And it is amazing to me still that people are going to be totally fine with the idea of a $1,400 check. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. I really try to stress this as much as I can for everybody who is out there. This issue primarily is exactly what President Trump was talking about when he was talking about swampy behavior and swamp creatures. All of this money that could do true good to communities in the state of Washington and throughout the country, money that's really needed. Small businesses who really need this money, payroll protection, people who really need this money, they should be getting much more. They are getting breadcrumbs compared to what Pelosi's friends are getting or Biden's friends are getting. Breadcrumbs. And you should be outraged at this. You should demand more from your government. You should demand more from your representatives. You should demand more from your country. And instead, what we get is a sweet $1,400 check, which, by the way, if you're so concerned about small businesses, what are most people going to do with that $1,400 check? I doubt they'll be saving it. Most people will be going to Best Buy or Target. I would hope that people would put it into small businesses. But if you're pulled so tight financially that you don't have any other choice, you're going to be spending it at the big box stores. What other choice do you have? So effectively what this is kind of a weird subsidy for places like Costco or places like Walmart or places like Target or places like Sam's Club, wherever you live in the country. So this money is just going to be taken right from the federal government into your pocket and into major corporations. So congratulations if you were looking forward to this. I hope you get exactly what you wanted. I'm Jack Stein. You're listening to Cairo Nights. When we get back, Rachel Bell is coming into the studio and we will talk about alternative ways of child rearing. Rachel Bell has a fascinating story about how people raise their children across the world in different ways and how we can improve as a nation because of it. Once again, I'm Jack Stein. You're listening to Cairo Nights. We'll take a real quick break. We'll be right back after this.
You can ring my bell, Rachel Bell. You can ring my bell, Rachel Bell.
Welcome back to Cairo Nights. Rachel Bell is in the studio. Rachel Bell, you picked a story that is near and dear to my heart, which is how to raise children and how to raise them effectively. And I am so very fascinated to jump right into this. What you got for us, Rachel Bell?
Yeah, well, as you know, as everybody knows, parents love when people without children give them advice on parenting. So not only do I not have children, you don't have children either. No. So let's gather around, parents. You're about to learn something about doing your daily job. This is actually a fascinating article. It's from The Atlantic, and it's called "There's a Better Way to Parent, Less Yelling, Less Praise." But even more interesting is where all the research came from. So this all comes from a new book that's called Hunt, Gather, Parent: What Ancient Cultures Can Teach Us About the Lost Art of Raising Happy, Helpful Little Humans. It's by an NPR journalist named, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this. I'm going to go with Michaeline Duclef. And what she did was she actually traveled around the world studying different cultures and societies. She brought her 3-year-old daughter with her to really kind of engage in these communities. And so, for example, she went to a Maya village on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. She went to an Inuit town in a northern Canadian territory and a community of hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. And one of the reasons I thought this was so fascinating is one of the things that I think about the most, that I kind of like to philosophize about and get existential about is, you know, what human behavior is ingrained because we are animals and what is cultural. And we live in a mostly cultural fueled world. Like everything that we think is cool or gross or weird is because our culture tells us it is so. You know, it doesn't exist that way in all cultures. So the point of her going to these communities, especially a hunter-gatherer community, is because they don't have all of these modern things we live with, like toys. For one, there's all kinds of things that they don't have. And so she believes they're operating in a more ancient way and using parenting techniques that might be a little bit more, natural, animalistic, and they're tens of thousands of years old, as opposed to American parenting styles, which are only about 100 years old. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple of the things she talks about, and then we can discuss it afterwards. So the first thing is constant praising. She started to kind of take note of her own parenting, and she would mark down in her journal every time she praised her little 3-year-old daughter, Rosie. So everybody knows this. A kid draws something. Her daughter would draw a flower and she would say, "Good job.
Yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful flower." It's so
best.
classic. Well, exactly. Well, she said, quote, "This is insane if you look around the world and throughout human history." She said, "Everywhere I went, I don't know if I ever heard a parent praise a child. Yet these kids are incredibly self-sufficient, confident, and respectful. Everything we want praise to do, these kids already have it without the praise." So she said that she stopped doing that with her daughter. And it wasn't that it was tough love. The parents in these other cultures would smile or nod if the kid did something that they liked. But she said that her daughter's behavior improved when she stopped acting this way. Because it curbs attention-seeking behavior. Number 2, she talks about tantrums. She says, in our culture, it's pretty natural if a kid is throwing a tantrum that you kind of get upset about them, but you also think that they are trying to manipulate you, or they're doing this on purpose, or like if the kid hits you, you say, "Oh, they're pushing my buttons," or "They're testing my boundaries." So this is a 2-part. Number 1, what she noticed, and she's been doing this and it's working for her, when a child has a tantrum and their energy goes up, you go way down. So she noticed a lot of the caretakers being very calm and speaking very softly and calmly and not making a big deal about it, kind of just addressing it, trying to kind of change the subject, maybe make a little joke with the kid or do something funny and move on. And she noticed this with her daughter, that like one of these caretakers acted this way and her daughter stopped the tantrum immediately. The other part of this is the idea of, that your kids are manipulating you or testing your boundaries. She said when she was in the Inuit community, she was literally laughed at when she said this because they said, quote, "She's a kid. She doesn't know how to manipulate like that." They said young children are illogical, irrational beings who haven't matured enough or acquired understanding or reason. So if you try to argue back, you're being like the child. And then just to end this, and then we could talk about some other things. All these people in other cultures, not only do they not really have toys, but they don't have kid-specific activities like going to a children's museum. Basically, any kid activity that's pretty boring to the adult. The idea is that when you kind of make all of this effort to entertain your kid all day and you feel like you have to do something to entertain and give them activities and take them places that only appeal to them, there's not a level playing field in the family. The kids become VIP and they're aware of that. And then you kind of can't get them to do the things you want them to do anymore because they think that they're at a higher status than you. So she said naturally by nature, kids want to help out. They want to clean, they want to take care of their siblings, and they will do that if you don't do any of these things that we've just talked about here today.
Rachel, this is a really great article because I think that the way to a better future for the entire world is if we stop using corporal punishment on children and if we stop using isolation treatment on children. I know I sound like a real hippie when I talk like that, but if you look at any of the data about spanking or any other kind of physical abuse, what it shows is that there is an immediate reduction in the behavior, that the undesired behavior, and then about a week later there's an actual increase in the undesired behavior. So every specialist that I've ever read or any therapist that I've talked to always tends to say the same thing, that corporal punishment is very detrimental to children. It's very bad for children's mental health. And then additionally, something like isolation treatment, saying, okay, well, you're going to be in a timeout for 10 or 15 minutes, doesn't work either because the child doesn't actually fully understand what they did wrong. You actually have to sit with them and engage with them and talk it out like they're a little adult or like they're a little impulsive creature that has no idea what they're doing, like a little demon child. So I found this to be such an interesting article in that regard, particularly that interaction where the little child hurt the animal and the parent picked the child up and just said, "We do not do this."
But very calmly.
Very calmly,
Yeah.
and said, "We do not do this," and then just kind of walked through it like that. I think that people often forget that moments like that for a child are huge, and when you default to something like spanking or isolation treatment, timeouts, things like that, you are confusing and humiliating a child. So this was I think it's a great article for you to choose.
And just the fact that you kind of had to say, like, I'm not a hippie shows what we have going on in our culture. Like the fact that you don't want to hit a child or put them in isolation means that you're a hippie, means that there is definitely like a problem in our culture. Right. And, everything you just said, of course, isn't good for adults either. I mean, I've done stories where I've interviewed people and read studies about, how bad that is in prison systems, where they do put like a lot of juveniles in solitary confinement, and it causes true mania. It doesn't nobody learns anything. Nobody doesn't. It's just like the whole concept of throwing people in jail. They're not learning anything and they get out and they're the same as they were. It's the same with kids. And it's true. Like, punishing like a 2 or 3 year old, like they honestly don't know and they're not doing it on purpose. And so I think what it is it's a lazy way of parenting because it's so much easier to just say, you get over there, than to explain to them what's going on. And I think that there's been a really strong new wave of parenting in the last, I don't know, I can just observe from my friends, let's say 7 or 8 years, where my friends do this kind of empathetic parenting where they do take a lot of time to explain to their kids why. And, like when they're having a tantrum, they say, I understand you're upset, instead of saying like, stop crying. And the kids do stop crying. Like they just want to be acknowledged. I think, it's like to be acknowledged that they are not getting their way, whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I'm a big fan of questioning why we do anything and just reevaluating, because, the way that we parent is just a result of like some guy that wrote a book that became a bestseller. Like, who says that it's right? So I think that this way, kind of going back to ancient practices, is really interesting.
Rachel Bell, you're the best as per usual. We'll have to pick up this topic again. You're listening to Cairo Nights. When we get back, we will be doing some good news with Mr. Frank Shires and Mr. Shane Peterson. We'll take a real quick break. We'll be right back after this. The thing that I wanted to talk about, Frank, is that this is good news. Everybody likes to talk about climate change and how we're affecting the aminals and how they're all decreasing. But I think something about the yearly cycle of the animals kind of returning, like if, for example, you hear about swallows or butterflies moving from Mexico all the way up to Canada. Whales are really they absolutely terrify me. Whales more so than any other creature. Bears, sharks make no difference to me whatsoever.
More than sharks, really?
Yeah, whales, 100%. Orcas, gray whales. Okay, so when I was a young lad, we went out. I lived in a tiny beach town, Monterey, California.
Beautiful.
It's probably 8 or 9 years old. And we went out on the boat and we went to go see the whales as they were migrating. And one of them got very close to the boat. And I saw this gigantic creature. I see its huge eyeball and its huge mouth, and it flips around and then it goes on its merry way. And I was terrified, petrified by this, Frank Shire. And still to this day, I ask myself, how can something so large not be violent? How is something so large not just rip a man to shreds? So I ask you, Frank Shires, is there an animal out there that other people don't have a fear of, but you fear?
That's a completely out of left field kind of question, Jack. I can't.
What are you talking? Okay,
I'm sorry.
Think of it.
You just qualified it by saying, "What is there an animal I fear that other people don't?" I mean, it's like,
right, exactly.
Well, what the hell? I don't know. Shane, how about you?
I mean, that's a really serious question. I mean, my biggest fear is always avalanches. But one thing that I am really scared about is if I ever encounter a wolverine, which is a very rare chance. But those things, they look cute, they seem harmless, but they will completely rip your face off. So, I mean, that's one animal that I hope I never cross paths with. I've crossed paths with mountain lions and bobcats and plenty of different types of stuff. Yeah, I grew up on a ranch and I grew up in the hills, so seeing that type of stuff isn't too unfamiliar to me. And, you know, if you keep your distance and you're smart, you're all right. But I just pray that I never come to the day where I come across a wolverine.
I suppose people, to answer your question, Jack, I suppose most people are not frightened of killer whales, orcas. On the other hand, you'd never get me in the water with one. What most people don't realize is that most killer whales do not eat salmon. Most of them eat seals. And they eat them like it's like something to see. It is really. Right. I mean, Jack, if you had seen that, you'd never go near the salt water again. I mean, you sounds like you saw a gray whale or some other equally benign creature that eats shrimp.
Benign, Frank. They're scheming, Frank. This is the thing about whales, is that they're scheming and they look like they've got something else going on behind those eyes. Those eyes are dead eyes.
I can guarantee you that if it's a killer whale, that's true. Because they've gone through killer whales. There are transient pods. We have the southern resident killer whales up here that are endangered. But we also have what are called transient pods of killer whales that come through. They're the ones that range up and down the coast and don't really stick around one area. They're the ones that eat seals. And I can tell you for a fact that there was a time, probably 7 or 8 years ago, where a pod of transients went into Hood Canal and wiped out something like 25-30% of the seals in Hood Canal, and did it in front of a Girl Scout camp at one point. It's like, wham! The seal is out offshore, right? The girl says, "Oh, look, it's a seal!" And the seal suddenly looks really panicked, really frightened, and then suddenly this killer whale just comes up from below and just boom!
I've seen enough National Geographic to know how awful killer whales are, but I'm telling you, Frank, there's something about animals that you describe, whales in particular, but animals that other people view as being benign or innocuous. Sometimes there's something going on there. There's no way that you move through the horrific thing that is nature without having some kind of skill set. Anyway, I'm Jack Stein. Coming up in the 8 o'clock hour, we are going to talk to a person who has exited the QAnon movement. Find out all of the details coming up next. You're listening to Cairo Nights.